Imagine calling your son to ask about his upcoming wedding, excited to help with last-minute preparations, only to be told by your daughter-in-law that the ceremony happened yesterday, without you. No invitation, no phone call, no explanation. Just the crushing realization that your own son got married and deliberately excluded you from the most important day of his life. My name is Patricia Johnson. I'm 55 years old, and I thought I knew my son. But sometimes the people we love most are capable of betrayals so deep they change everything. If you want to hear more shocking family stories that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Because what happened next will leave you speechless. The phone call that shattered my world came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping my second cup of coffee and scrolling through wedding Pinterest boards, trying to find inspiration for centerpieces. My son David's wedding was supposed to be in 2 weeks, and I was beyond excited to help make his special day perfect. David had been with his fiancée Michelle for 3 years. She was a quiet, reserved woman who worked in marketing at a tech company. I'd always felt like she kept me at arm's length, but I'd attributed it to shyness. Some people take time to warm up, and I was determined to be patient and welcoming. After all, she was going to be my daughter-in-law. The wedding planning had been challenging. Every suggestion I made was politely declined. Every offer to help was met with, "We've got it handled." When I asked about dress shopping, Michelle said she'd already found something online. When I offered to host the bridal shower, I was told they weren't having one. It felt like I was being systematically excluded from every aspect of my son's wedding preparation. But David assured me it was just Michelle's preference for keeping things small and simple. "She's not big on traditional wedding stuff, Mom," he'd explained when I expressed concern about being left out. "She just wants something intimate and low-key. You'll be there for the important part, the actual wedding." So I'd focused on that, the actual wedding. The moment I'd get to see my only son marry the woman he loved. I'd bought a beautiful navy dress, found the perfect shoes, and even booked an appointment to get my hair done the day before. I'd been a single mother since David was 5, working 2 jobs to put him through college, and this wedding felt like the culmination of all our struggles and dreams. That Tuesday morning, I decided to call David to ask about the final guest count. We were supposed to confirm numbers with the caterer, and I wanted to make sure we hadn't forgotten anyone important. David answered on the 4th ring, and something in his voice immediately set me on edge. He sounded distant, distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "Hi, sweetheart. I was just calling about the wedding. Do we have a final head count for the caterer? And did you remember to send an invitation to your Aunt Gloria? I know she's been asking about it." There was a long pause, so long that I thought the call might have dropped. "David, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." Mom, can you hold on a second? Michelle wants to talk to you." My heart fluttered with happiness. Michelle rarely wanted to speak with me directly. Maybe she was finally ready to let me help with something. Or perhaps she wanted to discuss some last-minute details. "Mrs. Johnson." Michelle's voice came through the phone, crisp and businesslike. "Hi, Michelle. I'm so excited about the wedding. Is everything coming together okay?" "About that," she said, her tone so casual it took me a moment to process her words. "The wedding was yesterday." I laughed, thinking I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The wedding. It was yesterday afternoon. We decided to move it up." The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, hot liquid splashing across my bare feet. But I barely noticed the mess or the burning sensation. All I could hear was the rushing sound in my ears, like being underwater. "I don't understand," I managed to say. "What do you mean it was yesterday?" "We had a small ceremony at the courthouse. Just immediate family." "But I'm immediate family. I'm David's mother." "We kept it very small," Michelle repeated, as if that explained everything. "Can I please speak to David?" "He's in the shower," she said quickly. "Look, Mrs. Johnson, I need to go. We're leaving for our honeymoon this afternoon." The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, holding a silent phone and trying to understand what had just happened. My son had gotten married without me. The boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved, unconditionally for 28 years had deliberately excluded me from his wedding day. I don't remember cleaning up the broken mug or the spilled coffee. I don't remember sitting down at my kitchen table or how long I stayed there, staring at my phone and replaying Michelle's words. The wedding was yesterday. 4 words that had just rewritten the entire narrative of my relationship with my son. When the shock finally wore off, it was replaced by a rage so pure and consuming that it scared me. I called David's number repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent text after text, each one more desperate than the last. "David, please call me. I need to understand what happened. How could you get married without telling me? I don't understand why you would do this to me. Please, just call me back. We need to talk." By evening, I'd sent 17 messages with no response. Finally, at 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Sorry, Mom. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing. We'll talk when I get back from the honeymoon." A spur-of-the-moment thing. A courthouse wedding that excluded his mother was described as spontaneous, as if they'd suddenly decided to grab lunch somewhere new instead of getting married. The casual dismissal of my hurt felt almost worse than the original betrayal. I called my sister Carmen, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. She lived in Atlanta, and we talked every few days, but this was different. This was the kind of call you make when your world falls apart. "Slow down, Patricia. What happened?" Carmen's voice was full of concern. Through my tears, I explained about the phone call, about Michelle's casual announcement, about David's silence. Carmen listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I got to the part about the wedding being over. "He got married without you?" she repeated, as if saying it out loud might make it make sense. "Patricia, that's unforgivable. What kind of son does that to his mother?" "I don't know," I sobbed. "I thought we were close. I thought I meant something to him. How could he just erase me from the most important day of his life?" "What did he say when you confronted him?" "He won't answer my calls. He texted that it was spur of the moment and that we'll talk when he gets back from his honeymoon." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "Patricia, honey, courthouse weddings aren't spur of the moment. You have to get a marriage license, file paperwork, make appointments. This was planned. They made a deliberate decision to exclude you." Hearing it spelled out so clearly made it worse somehow. This wasn't an oversight or a misunderstanding. This was intentional. My son and his new wife had sat down and decided that I didn't deserve to be part of their wedding day. The next few days blurred together in a haze of hurt, anger, and confusion. I called in sick to my job at the community college where I worked as an administrative assistant. I couldn't imagine sitting in that office, pretending everything was normal when my entire relationship with my son had just imploded. Friends from church called to check on me when I missed Sunday service. I'd been so excited about David's wedding that I'd told everyone about it. Now I had to explain that it had happened without me, watching their faces cycle through confusion, shock, and pity. "Maybe there's a reasonable explanation," my friend Joyce suggested gently. Maybe it really was last minute, and they were planning to have a bigger celebration later that would include everyone. But I knew better. Michelle's tone on the phone hadn't been apologetic or regretful. It had been matter of fact, like she was informing me of a change in their cable service. There was no bigger celebration planned. There was no intention to include me in anything. I had been deliberately and systematically erased from my son's life, and I didn't understand why. David and Michelle were supposed to return from their honeymoon on a Thursday. I spent that entire week crafting and recrafting what I would say to him, how I would approach this conversation. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to let him know how deeply he'd hurt me. But another part of me was terrified that if I came on too strong, I might lose him completely. By Thursday evening, I couldn't wait any longer. I drove to David's apartment, the same one-bedroom place he'd been renting since graduating college. I'd helped him move in, had spent countless evenings there having dinner and watching movies together. It felt surreal to be standing outside, his door, wondering if I was still welcome in my own son's life. I knocked softly, my heart pounding. Michelle answered the door, and her expression immediately shifted from neutral to guarded when she saw me. "Mrs. Johnson, we weren't expecting. You? I need to talk to David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we have some things to discuss." "He's tired from traveling," she said, not moving to let me in. "Maybe you could call tomorrow and set up a time to meet." The idea that I needed to make an appointment to see my own son in his apartment was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Almost. "Michelle, I'm his mother. I think I can come in for a few minutes." "Actually, this isn't a good time," she said firmly. "We're still unpacking and settling back in. I can see David behind you," I said, looking past her into the living room where my son was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. "David, can you please come talk to your mother?" He looked up reluctantly, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not anger or irritation, but something worse. Indifference. Like I was a neighbor he barely knew rather than the woman who'd raised him. "Hey, Mom," he said, walking to the door but not asking Michelle to step aside. "What's up?" "What's up?" I repeated, incredulous. "David, you got married without telling me, without inviting me. I think that deserves more than what's up." He glanced at Michelle, and I caught a look that passed between them, some kind of silent communication that excluded me entirely. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset, but we wanted something small and private. It wasn't personal." "Not personal?" My voice cracked. "David, I'm your mother. How is excluding me from your wedding not personal?" "You're being dramatic," Michelle interjected. "Lots of couples have small ceremonies. It doesn't mean anything negative about their families." I stared at her, this woman who'd been in my son's life for 3 years, but had never once attempted to build a real relationship with me. "Michelle, with all due respect, this is between David and me." "Actually," David said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, "Michelle is my wife now. What affects me affects her. We're a unit." The word unit hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I understood that I wasn't just excluded from their wedding. I was excluded from their life. Somewhere along the way, without my knowledge or understanding, I had become an outsider to my own son. "David, can we please just talk privately for 5 minutes? Mother to son?" He looked at Michelle again, seeking permission. Permission from his wife to speak privately with his mother. When she gave an almost imperceptible nod, he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "You have 5 minutes," he said, crossing his arms. "Then I'm going back inside to my wife." Standing on that doorstep, looking at my son's closed-off expression, I realized I was about to have the most important conversation of my life with someone who had already decided I didn't matter. "David, I need you to help me understand what happened," I began, trying to keep my voice calm despite the storm of emotions inside me. "We've always been close. You've always included me in important decisions. Why would you get married without even telling me?" He shifted uncomfortably, looking everywhere except at my face. "Mom, it's not that deep. We just wanted something simple." A simple wedding still includes the groom's mother, David. This wasn't about simplicity. This was about excluding me specifically. I need to know why. For a moment, I thought he might actually open up, might give me a real explanation. But then his expression hardened again. You want the truth? Fine. Michelle doesn't like you, Mom. She never has. She thinks you're overbearing and clingy. And she didn't want you at our wedding making everything about yourself. The words hit me like physical blows. Making everything about myself? David, when have I ever done that? Are you serious? You've been trying to control our relationship from day one, always asking about our plans, always wanting to be included in everything we do. Michelle feels suffocated by you. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and thoughtful, and wondered when he'd become capable of such cruelty. David, I was interested in your life because I love you. I wanted to be included because you're my son. When did caring about you become a character flaw? It's not caring, Mom. It's possessiveness. You act like you own me, like I owe you access to every part of my life just because you're my mother. I don't think I own you, I said, my voice breaking. But I thought I mattered to you. I thought our relationship meant something. It does mean something. But Michelle is my priority now. She's my wife, and her comfort comes first. If that means setting boundaries with you, then that's what I'll do. The casual way he said it, like my feelings were irrelevant, like decades of love and sacrifice could be dismissed for his wife's comfort, left me speechless for a moment. What boundaries, David? What have I done that was so terrible that you felt you had to exclude me from your wedding? You want examples? Fine. Remember when you showed up at our apartment last month with groceries because you happened to be in the neighborhood? We were having a private evening together, and you just inserted yourself into it. I brought you food because I thought, you might be too busy to shop. I was trying to be helpful. You were being intrusive. And remember when you asked Michelle about her family at dinner? She told me later that it felt like an interrogation. I thought back to that dinner, remembering how I'd asked Michelle about her parents, her siblings, her childhood. Normal questions that people ask when they're trying to get to know someone. Questions that showed interest, not intrusion. David, those were normal conversations. I was trying to build a relationship with her. She doesn't want a relationship with you, Mom. She's made that clear. And I support her decision. The finality in his voice, the complete dismissal of my worth as a person and as his mother, was devastating. But it also sparked something else. Anger. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice gaining strength. Your wife decided she doesn't like me, and rather than encouraging her to work through whatever issues she has, you chose to exclude me from your wedding. You threw away our relationship to make her happy. I chose my wife over my mother's feelings. Yes, that's what married men do. No, David, that's what weak men do. Strong men don't let their spouses isolate them from their families unless there's abuse or serious dysfunction. They find ways to balance both relationships. His face flushed with anger. Don't you dare call me weak. Then don't act weak. Don't let your wife's insecurities destroy your relationship with the woman who raised you. He stepped back toward the door. This conversation is over. David, please. But he was already inside, the door closing with a finality that felt like the end of everything. After that confrontation on David's doorstep, the silence began. Not the temporary quiet that follows an argument, but the deep, intentional silence of someone who has decided you no longer exist. David stopped returning my calls, stopped responding to my texts, stopped acknowledging my existence entirely. At first, I thought it was just anger that would fade with time. We'd had disagreements before. What parent and child haven't? And we'd always worked through them. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and the silence only deepened. I tried everything I could think of to reach him. I sent cards for his birthday with no response. I left voicemails apologizing for anything I might have done wrong, begging him to talk to me. I even showed up at his office. He worked as an accountant at a small firm downtown, but the receptionist told me he was in meetings all day. "Maybe if you made an appointment," she suggested kindly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The idea that I needed to make an appointment to see my own son at his workplace was humiliating. But I was desperate enough to try anything. When I called back the next day to schedule something, I was told that David had requested not to take any personal calls or visits during work hours. The isolation was crushing. I'd been a single mother for most of David's life, which meant that our relationship had been the center of my world for over 2 decades. My social circle was small, mostly consisting of other single mothers whose children had also grown up and moved on with their lives. But their children still called them, still visited, still included them in major life events. My friend Janet tried to be supportive. "Maybe he just needs time to cool off," she said over coffee one afternoon. Men can be stubborn about admitting they're wrong. But I knew this was different. This wasn't stubbornness. It was complete erasure. David hadn't just cut off communication. He'd cut off my access to information about his life entirely. I had no idea where he was living. They'd moved out of the apartment, what he was doing, whether he was happy or struggling. I'd gone from being his confidant to being a stranger overnight. The worst part was the way other people reacted when they found out. Some were sympathetic, assuming there must be some terrible misunderstanding that would eventually be resolved. Others were less kind, suggesting that there must be more to the story, that grown children don't cut off their parents without good reason. "What did you do?" became a question I heard more often than I cared to count. The assumption that I must have done something awful, something that justified being excluded from my son's wedding and subsequently banished from his life, was almost as painful as the silence itself. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Williams, a kind woman in her 60s who specialized in family relationships. During our sessions, I went over every interaction I'd had with David and Michelle, looking for clues about what I'd done wrong. "Patricia," Dr. Williams said during one particularly difficult session, "have you considered that this might not be about anything you did? Sometimes people make choices that have more to do with their own issues than with the behavior of others." "But he must have a reason," I insisted. "Children don't just abandon their mothers for no reason." "Some do," she said gently. "And sometimes the reasons have nothing to do with the parent's actual behavior. Sometimes it's about control, or about pleasing a spouse who has their own agenda." The possibility that Michelle had systematically turned David against me, that my son had been manipulated into cutting me off, was somehow both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant I hadn't failed as a mother. Terrifying because it meant David might be trapped in a relationship with someone who was isolating him from his family. But without any contact with him, there was no way to know for sure. 8 months after the wedding that excluded me, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from Sarah, David's ex-girlfriend from college. They'd dated for 2 years before breaking up amicably when David graduated and moved back home. I'd always liked Sarah. She was warm, intelligent, and genuinely seemed to care about David's well-being. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Sarah Martinez. I don't know if you remember me, but I dated David in college." "Of course I remember you, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "I'm okay, but I'm calling because I'm worried about David. I heard through mutual friends that he got married and that you weren't invited to the wedding." Just hearing someone else acknowledge the situation with concern rather than judgment made me start crying. "Yes, that's true. We haven't spoken in months. Mrs. Johnson, I need to tell you something. I ran into David and his wife at a restaurant last week, and I barely recognized him. He seemed different, withdrawn. When I went over to say hello, his wife was incredibly rude to me, and David just sat there and let her be. That's not the David I knew." "What do you mean by rude?" She basically told me I had no business speaking to them, that David's past relationships were irrelevant to his current life. But it wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, and how David reacted. He apologized to her afterward, like he'd done something wrong by having a normal conversation with an old friend. Sarah's words confirmed my worst fears about Michelle's controlling behavior, but they also gave me something I hadn't had in months: validation that I wasn't imagining things. Sarah, can I ask you something? When you were dating David, did I ever seem overbearing or inappropriate to you? Are you kidding? You were wonderful. You made me feel so welcome in your home. David used to talk about how grateful he was to have such a supportive mother. He was proud of everything you'd accomplished as a single parent. Hearing this made me cry harder, but they were tears of relief mixed with grief. Relief that I hadn't been the terrible mother I'd started to believe I was. Grief for the relationship I'd lost with a son who had once been proud of me. Sarah, I don't know what to do. He won't talk to me. I don't even know where he lives anymore. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I did some digging through mutual friends, and I found out some things that might interest you. Did you know that Michelle made David cut off contact with most of his college friends, and that she insisted they move to a different town so he'd have to find a new job? I hadn't known any of this. Where are they living? About an hour north of you, in Millbrook. David's working at a small accounting firm there. Mrs. Johnson, I think your son is in an abusive relationship, and I think his wife isolated him from you on purpose. The pieces started falling into place. Michelle's immediate hostility toward me, her refusal to participate in normal family interactions, her insistence on keeping the wedding secret, David's sudden personality change and willingness to cut me off completely. It all pointed to a pattern of isolation and control that I'd been too hurt to see clearly. What can I do? I asked. He won't speak to me. He won't even acknowledge that I exist. I don't know yet, but I think there are other people who are concerned about him. Let me make some calls and see what I can find out. In the meantime, don't give up on him. The David I knew loved you deeply. If he's cutting you off, it's because someone is making him feel like he has to choose. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Not just hope that I might eventually reconcile with David, but hope that I wasn't losing my mind, that the situation was as wrong as it felt, and that somewhere underneath Michelle's influence, my son still existed. Sarah kept her promise and reached out to David's college friends. What she discovered was a pattern of isolation that extended far beyond just me. Michelle had systematically removed every meaningful relationship from David's life, always with reasonable-sounding explanations that added up to complete control. She convinced him that his college friends were immature and holding him back, Sarah told me during a follow-up call. She said his co-workers at his old job were gossipy and unprofessional. And of course, she painted you as overbearing and intrusive. She isolated him geographically, professionally, and socially. Armed with this information, Sarah, two of David's closest college friends, Marcus and Jennifer, and I decided to stage an intervention. Not the kind you see on TV for addiction, but a gathering designed to show David that people who truly cared about him were concerned about the changes in his life. We planned it carefully. Marcus reached out to David, suggesting they meet for lunch at a restaurant in Millbrook. He told David he was in town on business and wanted to catch up. Marcus would be there early, and the rest of us would arrive after David was already seated, making it harder for him to leave immediately. The day of the intervention, I was terrified. I hadn't seen my son in almost a year, and I had no idea how he would react to seeing me. But I knew this might be my only chance to break through Michelle's influence and reach the son I'd raised. When we walked into the restaurant, I spotted David immediately. He looked thinner than I remembered, and there was something different about his posture. Hunched, defensive, like someone who expected criticism. When he saw me approaching with Sarah and Jennifer, his face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and something that might have been relief. "What is this?" he asked Marcus, but his eyes were on me. "This is people who care about you wanting to have a conversation," I said. sitting down across from him before he could leave. "David, please, just give us 10 minutes. I don't have anything to say to you." "Then just listen," Sarah said gently. "We're worried about you." For the next 20 minutes, we took turns sharing our observations. Sarah talked about how different he seemed when she'd seen him at the restaurant. Marcus described how David had disappeared from their friend group without explanation. Jennifer mentioned that she'd tried to reach out multiple times and never received a response. "You used to be the kind of person who stayed in touch with people," Jennifer said. "You used to care about maintaining relationships. What happened to that person?" "I grew up," David said defensively. "I got married. My priorities changed. Growing up doesn't mean cutting off everyone who cares about you," I said softly. "Marriage should add to your life, not subtract from it. Michelle doesn't like my past relationships. She thinks they're inappropriate." "David," Marcus said carefully, "do you realize that you just used the exact same words Michelle uses? That's not your voice. That's hers." For the first time, I saw a crack in David's armor. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "She's protecting our marriage," he said, but with less conviction. "From what?" Sarah asked. "From people who love you and want you to be happy? How is that a threat to your marriage?" "You don't understand. She had a difficult childhood. She doesn't trust people easily. So because she has trust issues, you have to sacrifice every other relationship in your life?" Jennifer asked. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been isolated from everyone who might notice that you're not happy." David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something internally. "I am happy," he said finally, but he couldn't meet anyone's eyes when he said it. "Are you?" Sarah asked gently. "Because you don't look happy. You look exhausted." The intervention didn't end with David having a sudden realization and rushing into my arms, but it planted seeds of doubt that I hoped would eventually grow into questions he couldn't ignore. The intervention didn't immediately restore my relationship with David, but it accomplished something almost as important. It broke Michelle's complete control over his narrative. For the first time in over a year, David had been forced to listen to people who remembered who he used to be, who could point out the changes in him that he'd been too close to see. 3 weeks after our restaurant meeting, I received a text from David. Just 4 words. "Can we talk privately?" We met at a park halfway between our towns, sitting on a bench by a small pond while ducks paddled in lazy circles. David looked exhausted, older than his 28 years. But there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that had been missing for months. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," he said without preamble. "When you were trying to get to know Michelle, were you really being intrusive, or was I just seeing it through her perspective?" The question told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. He was starting to question the narrative he'd been fed. "David, I was trying to build a relationship with the woman my son loved. I asked about her family, her interests, her work, the same questions I'd ask about any new person in your life. If that felt intrusive to her, it might say more about her comfort level with family relationships than about my behavior." He nodded slowly. "She said you were trying to control our relationship, but looking back, I can't think of a single time you actually tried to tell us what to do. Honey, what's happening at home? Are you happy?" David was quiet for a long time, watching the ducks and gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know anymore. Michelle monitors my phone, my email, my social media. She gets upset if I mention wanting to see friends or family. She says it means I don't value our marriage enough, that I'm prioritizing other people over her. I've been walking on eggshells for so long that I forgot what it felt like to just breathe." My heart broke for him. My strong, confident son had been reduced to this anxious, isolated version of himself. David, that's not normal behavior in a healthy marriage. Loving partners don't try to cut you off from everyone who cares about you. I know that now. The intervention made me realize how many people I've lost touch with, how many relationships I've sacrificed to keep her happy. And it's never enough. No matter how much I give up, she always finds something else that's a threat to our marriage. What do you want to do? I want to come home, he said, finally meeting my eyes. Not to live with you, but to rebuild our relationship. I want to remember who I was before I became this person who was afraid to love his own mother. The road back wasn't easy. David had to extricate himself from a marriage that had become a prison, dealing with Michelle's manipulations and threats. She told him I had poisoned his friends against her, that the intervention was proof of my controlling nature, that if he left her, he'd realize too late what he'd given up. But David had finally seen the pattern clearly, and once you see emotional abuse for what it is, it's impossible to unsee it. Today, 2 years later, David is divorced and rebuilding his life. He lives in his own apartment, has reconnected with old friends, and calls me twice a week. He's in therapy, working through the trauma of psychological abuse and learning to trust his own judgment again. Our relationship is different now. Deeper in some ways because we've both learned not to take it for granted. David knows what it feels like to lose family, and I know what it feels like to fight for someone you love, even when they can't fight for themselves. Sometimes the people we love get lost, but that doesn't mean they're gone forever. Sometimes love means waiting in the darkness until they find their way back to the light. If you've ever had to fight for a relationship with someone you love, or if you've recognized signs of isolation and control in your own life or someone else's, share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else find the courage to reach out or hold on. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family, love, and the courage to never give up on the people who matter most.